Nobody sits down one day and decides they want to contact the dead. It happens because something happens first. Something unbearable. A phone call that changes everything in 30 seconds. An accident that came without warning on an ordinary Tuesday. A diagnosis that moved too fast for anyone to say everything that needed to be said. A person who was there yesterday, at dinner, laughing, making plans, and is simply not there anymore. A door that closes so suddenly there was no time for a last word. No time for a real goodbye. No time to say the things you had been meaning to say for years and always assumed there would be more time for. And the people left behind carry all of it. The unsaid things. The questions that have no answers. The conversations that were interrupted in the middle. The sense that something important remains unfinished in a way that will never have a natural resolution. The grief that does not follow the stages it is supposed to follow. That does not move in a straight line toward acceptance. And somewhere in the middle of that specific kind of silence that only grief produces, many of them ask the same question. Is there any way to know if they are okay? Is there any way to reach them? Is there anything at all on the other side of that door? That question is as old as human consciousness itself, and it deserves to be treated with the seriousness and the tenderness it actually carries, because the people asking it are not asking out of curiosity. They are asking because they loved someone, and the love did not stop when the person did, before any organized religion had an opinion about it. Before any institution had declared it, they were leaving flowers, food, objects of significance. They were asking for signs. They were listening for something in the silence. They were speaking names out loud into empty rooms, not because they expected an audible reply, but because the love needed somewhere to go. The oldest burial sites in human history, some of them dating back over 100,000 years, contain objects placed with obvious care beside the dead, tools, ornaments, pigments, food. Before any doctrine had framed it in theological language, human beings across every culture that has ever existed were doing the same thing. They were talking to the people they had lost. They were going to the places where those people had been, not because those ancient people thought the objects would be practically useful in any ordinary sense, because they believed, or hoped, or needed to believe, that whoever had left was not entirely gone. That the relationship continued in some form, that what had been between them, whatever that invisible thing between two people is, had not simply stopped when the body stopped. This is not superstition. This is the most human thing there is. The impulse to maintain connection with those who have died runs through every civilization that has ever been recorded, across every ocean, across every language, across every belief system that has ever attempted to make sense of what death actually is. In ancient China, the honoring of ancestors and the practice of communicating with them through ritual was woven into the fabric of daily life for thousands of years. Not as an exotic fringe practice, but as a respected and normal part of how families related to those who had gone before them. In West African traditions that remain vibrant today, the ancestors are understood to remain active presences in the life of the community, accessible and caring, reachable by those who approach with sincerity and love. In the indigenous traditions of the Americas, the dead and the living exist in a continuous relationship, with the departed available to guide, to protect, to communicate through dreams and through the natural world. In Shintoism, in Japan, tending the ancestor, speaking to those who have gone, bringing them into the significant moments of family life, is practiced by millions of people as something entirely unremarkable. Not a dramatic spiritual event, a simple, daily act of continued relationship with people who are no longer physically present, but who have not ceased to matter. The ancient Greeks consulted the dead through specific sites called temples dedicated to communication with the departed. Priests, trained in the practice, guided the bereaved or the curious through rituals designed to open the boundary between worlds. In ancient Egypt, the relationship between the living and the dead was so central to the culture that an entire civilization's architecture and economy were organized around it. The Mesopotamians practiced what their texts called raising the ghost, and the Hebrew Bible, which is often cited as a source of prohibition against these practices, also contains one of the most striking accounts of successful communication with the dead ever recorded in ancient literature. In the book of 1 Samuel, King Saul, desperate before a battle he fears he will lose, seeks out a medium. He hath himself banned these practitioners from his kingdom, but in his fear he looks for one anyway. He travels in disguise to a woman in Ender, and asks her to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel, who has recently died. She does. Samuel appears, and what happens next is remarkable. Samuel is not a projection, not a fabrication. He is annoyed at being disturbed. He knows what is happening in the world. He gives Saul information about the outcome of the battle that proves accurate. The text treats this as a real encounter, not a fraud, not a delusion, a genuine contact across the boundary of death, happening in the pages of the very scripture that prohibits the practice. What the text is doing, in its complexity, is acknowledging that the connection between the living and the dead is real, while also indicating that it should not be casually or routinely pursued. The prohibition is not because it is impossible. It is because it is real, and what is real requires respect and care. None of these traditions grew out of theology textbooks or institutional decisions. They grew out of love that did not know where to go when the person it was directed at was no longer physically reachable. They grew out of the refusal, consistent across all of human history, to simply accept that death ends everything. The question of whether spiritual communication with the dead is possible has been answered differently by different religious traditions. Some have embraced it, developed frameworks for understanding it, and treated it as a legitimate and even important part of spiritual life. Others have warned against it, discouraged it, or forbidden it outright. These different positions come from different theological frameworks, different readings of scripture, different understandings of what the dead are and where they go and what relationship, if any, remains possible between the living and the dead. What is worth noting, without entering into any debate about which position is correct, is this. Telling a person who is destroyed by grief that they should not try to reach the person they lost is one of the hardest things to actually enforce. Not because people are disobedient, because the need is real, and the prohibition does not make the need go away. It only makes the person feel guilty for having it. How do you tell a man who just buried his son, his 23-year-old son who had his whole life in front of him, that he is not allowed to try to speak to him? How do you tell a mother whose daughter was taken suddenly, without warning, without any goodbye, that she should simply accept the silence? The answer is that you can say it, but the heart does not obey. The heart keeps reaching, because that is what love does when it has nowhere else to go. And this is where the history of what is called mediumship, spiritual communication, or the channeling of the dead becomes something more than a debate about whether it is real or not real. It becomes a story about human beings in their most vulnerable moments, looking for something that might bring them peace. The formal organized movement known as spiritualism began in 19th century America, spread rapidly across Europe and much of the world. What drove this extraordinary growth was not primarily philosophical curiosity. It was grief. The 19th century was a century of enormous death, epidemic disease, industrial accidents, wars, the loss of children in infancy. That was then a common and devastating part of ordinary life. Families were losing people constantly and had no framework that satisfactorily answered the question of where those people had gone. The movement grew from the experiences of the Fox sisters in Heights, New York in 1848, who reported communication through a system of knocks from an entity in their home. The story spread with extraordinary speed. Within years, seances were being held in parlors across America and Europe. People gathered in darkened rooms, asking questions and waiting for responses from those who had departed. The seance became one of the defining cultural rituals of an entire era, practiced in the drawing rooms of the wealthy and the modest homes of ordinary grieving people with equal seriousness. It is important to say honestly that this world also contains significant fraud. Performers and opportunists discovered quickly that the grief of the bereaved was exploitable. Tables that seemed to move on their own were moved by hidden mechanisms. Voices from nowhere came from hidden confederates. The illusionist Harry Houdini spent years attending seances specifically to demonstrate how each effect was produced, and his exposures were damaging and real. Where there is grief, there has always been exploitation, and anyone approaching this territory needs both openness and discernment. Genuine spiritual communication does not need theatrical effects, does not need urgency, does not need to create dependency. But the existence of fraud does not prove the absence of the genuine. And within the spiritualist movement, alongside the frauds, there were also accounts that resisted easy explanation. Experiences reported by skeptical investigators who went looking to debunk and found themselves uncertain. The systematic framework for understanding spiritual communication that had the most lasting cultural impact came from a French educator named Hippolyte Denezard Rivail, who wrote under the pen name Alain Kardec. Working in Paris in the 1850s, Kardec compiled and organized what he presented as communications received through mediums and developed from them a coherent doctrine. The Spirit's Book, published in 1857, and the subsequent works he produced, laid out a framework in which spirits are understood as immortal, as passing through multiple incarnations, as part of their spiritual evolution, and as capable of communicating with the living when conditions allow it. Kardec's framework emphasized that communication with spirits was a serious spiritual responsibility, not entertainment, not a curiosity, not a form of power. The spirits that communicate in his framework are at various stages of their own development. Some are more evolved, more at peace, more able to offer genuine guidance or comfort. Others are less so. The medium serves as a channel with the responsibility that implies. The purpose of genuine communication was understood to be spiritual growth and comfort, not the satisfaction of curiosity or the performance of something spectacular. This framework found its deepest roots in Brazil, where Spiritism, as the Kardecist tradition is known, became integrated into the culture in a way that is unique in the world. Brazil today has the largest Spiritist community on earth. Spiritist centers operate in virtually every city. Spiritist hospitals and psychiatric institutions have functioned alongside conventional medicine. The tradition produced figures like Chico Xavier, a medium who lived from 1910 to 2002, who received and transmitted thousands of messages from deceased individuals. Many recipients described details they believed could not be explained by guessing, fraud, or ordinary research. Whether you believe what he did was genuine spiritual communication or something else entirely, the comfort that his work brought to hundreds of thousands of bereaved people over his lifetime is documented and real. And this is perhaps the most important thing to say about all of this. Whatever is happening in genuine spiritual communication, what it does for the people who receive it is real. Consider what it means for a mother who lost her child to receive something, a message, a sign, an experience in a session with someone she trusts. That gives her reason to believe her child is not simply gone, that her child is somewhere, that her child is at peace, that she will see them again, that the love between them was not simply erased when the child stopped breathing. The transformation that can happen in that person is real. The change in how she relates to her grief, to her remaining life, to the people still with her is real. The capacity to begin, slowly, to live again is real. Whether the message came from her child's actual consciousness continuing to exist in another dimension or from some other source, the healing is not less real because of uncertainty about the mechanism. This matters because the conversation about spiritual communication too often gets stuck in a debate about proof, about whether it can be verified, about whether what the medium says could have been known through ordinary means. All of those are legitimate questions, but they miss the most important reality in the room, which is a human being in pain looking for something that will allow them to continue. Now, here is the part that deserves to be said with great care, because it is the part that is perhaps most important of all. When someone we love dies, especially when they die young, unexpectedly, tragically, without warning, the grief that follows can turn in directions that deepen the wound rather than allow it to heal. One of the most common of those directions is toward God, as the source of blame. Why did God take my child? Why did God allow this? What kind of God lets this happen? What kind of God takes a 23-year-old with their whole life in front of them and leaves behind parents who will never be the same? What kind of God takes a person in their prime, in the middle of their story, before anything was finished? These are not questions that come from spiritual immaturity. They come from genuine love and genuine devastation, and they deserve something much better than easy answers. because there are no easy answers here, and anyone who offers them too quickly is not respecting the size of what has happened. But there is a way of understanding loss that, for many people, allows them to hold the grief without letting it destroy their relationship with whatever they understand the divine to be. Not a framework that makes the pain smaller. A framework that makes it possible to hold the pain without it turning into something that separates you from the very love that might help you through it. That framework, shared across many spiritual traditions, begins with this. The life we live here, in this physical form, is not the whole story. It is one chapter, one part of a journey that, in this view, began before we arrived in these bodies and continues after we leave them. What we call death is a transition, a change of form, a continuation of something that was already going on before we were born. The soul, the consciousness, the essential person, whatever language you use for the thing that makes someone specifically themselves, does not stop in this understanding. It moves, it continues. And in this view, God did not take your son. The cycle of life and death is not a judicial decision. It is built into the nature of physical existence itself. People arrive, they live, they depart. The length of the physical life is not the measure of the soul. The departure, as many spiritual traditions would frame it, is not a failure of love. It is the completion of a chapter. And in this understanding, God is not absent from the suffering. God is present in it, on both sides of it, with the one who left and with the ones who remain. And here is what the traditions that accept spiritual communication consistently say. When that love is strong enough, when the conditions are right, when someone with genuine sensitivity serves as a channel between the dimensions, something of that continued love can pass through. Not always, not on demand, not as a service that can be scheduled, but as something that happens when it happens, that arrives in ways that are often unexpected, that carries information or feeling or specificity that is not easily explained by ordinary means. The forms this takes are more varied than the dramatic sessions depicted in film. A dream so vivid and so specific that the person who wakes from it cannot treat it as ordinary dreaming. A sensation of presence in a familiar location, not frightening, not uncertain, but clear, as if the person is simply there. An object that moves, that appears, that holds meaning only to the person who finds it and to the person who is gone. A message received through someone with genuine mediumistic sensitivity, someone whose gift is not performance but perception, who brings through something specific enough, accurate enough, intimate enough that only the person receiving it can fully understand its weight. How does this actually happen? The framework that the Spiritist tradition offers, and that aligns with many other spiritual traditions across different cultures, is this. Consciousness does not require a physical body to exist. What we call the soul is not generated by the brain. It inhabits the body, uses. The body expresses itself through the body and continues when the body is no longer available. In this continuation, the person retains their essential identity, their memories, their love, their personality. They are recognizably themselves in a different form, in a different dimension of existence. Communication across that boundary is possible because consciousness is not confined to matter, and because love is one of the forces that most naturally bridges dimensions. When someone on this side carries intense love and grief for someone who has crossed, and when someone on the other side carries intense love for those left behind, that mutual pull can create conditions in which something passes through. A genuine medium in this understanding is a person whose own consciousness has developed the sensitivity to perceive those signals and transmit them with accuracy and humility. What comes through, when it comes, tends not to be dramatic. It tends to be specific. It tends to be exactly what the person most needed to hear, often something that could not have been guessed from outside. The specific nickname, the particular memory, the private thing that only the two of them knew, the answer to the question that had been left unanswered, the apologies that was never given, the love that was never fully expressed, the reassurance. I am okay. I am at peace. I can see you. I know you are struggling, and I love you still. Beyond formal mediumship, the accounts of people receiving signs from those who have departed are so widespread across every culture and every background that they cannot be categorized as a marginal phenomenon. A mother who lost her son sees a butterfly land on her hand at the exact moment she was asking silently for a sign. A husband who lost his wife hears a single word spoken in a specific familiar voice in an empty room, a word only she would have said in that way. A daughter has a dream so vivid and so specific in its detail, so different in quality from ordinary dreaming, that she wakes from it feeling she genuinely spent time with her father. Cardiologist Pim van Lomet, whose research on near-death experiences was published in the medical journal The Lancet, documented case after case of patients who were clinically unconscious or near death, and later reported verifiable perceptions of events that occurred while they were unresponsive. Perceptions they could not have obtained through ordinary means. None of this constitutes conclusive proof. The honest position is that the question remains genuinely open. What is not in question is that these experiences happen, that they are reported across every background and every level of skepticism, and that they have a consistent quality. They bring peace, not fear. They bring movement, not paralysis. They feel to the people who receive them, less like a haunting and more like a confirmation that the love was still there. What all of this points toward, and what I think is the most important thing to take from this entire history, is a particular way of understanding what death actually is. In the framework shared by most spiritual traditions across human history, death is not the destruction of a person. It is the departure of a person from one mode of existence to another. The person continues. The love continues. The connection continues. These continue whether or not there's ever a moment of what we would recognize as communication across the boundary. Whether or not you ever receive a message through a medium, through a dream, through a sign in the natural world. The truth these traditions point to is the same. The people you have loved and lost have not simply ceased to exist, and there is something else that needs to be said, with equal care and equal love, because it matters as much as everything above. The quality of what arrives in genuine communication always points in one direction: forward, peace, lightness. The sense that the person who is gone is okay and wants you to be okay too. That is the signature of something real. What does not come from genuine contact, what comes instead from a wound that is not healed, is the opposite. The compulsion to reach again and again. The inability to accept any answer as sufficient. The organization of daily life around maintaining a channel that was never meant to stay permanently open. The people who have moved on are in their own journey. The love they had for you continues, but they are not suspended in the moment of departure, waiting. When genuine communication happens, it tends to arrive with a quality of completion, not continuation. It says, I am well. I love you. Let me go. Not because the love ends, because holding tightly to someone who has crossed does not serve them or you. It keeps both of you in the moment of the loss, rather than allowing either of you to move through it. Carrying is love. Being unable to set them down is grief that has become a kind of prison for you and, in its way, for them. The healthiest relationship with someone who has died is one where you trust they are held. You carry the love lightly enough to walk forward with it, and you live the life that is still yours to live. Because your life is still happening. Right now, in this present moment, your life is still happening. The people still with you need you present, not divided between this world and wherever your grief has taken you. The most profound way to honor someone who died too young, too suddenly, too without warning, is not to stop living. It is to live more fully, to take from the reality of their departure the understanding that the time we have here is not unlimited, that the things we keep meaning to say should probably be said now. They are with God. They are at peace, or moving toward peace, in whatever process continues on the other side. They do not need you to rescue them. They need you to know they are okay, and they need you to live well. What all of this points toward is a particular way of understanding what you actually are. In the view shared by most spiritual traditions, you are not a body that happens to have a consciousness. You are a consciousness that is currently inhabiting a body. When the body is finished, the consciousness is not finished. it goes elsewhere. It continues, and the love that has been built in this life, between a parent and a child, between two people who have truly known each other, that love, in this understanding, is not a byproduct of biology. It is something real that persists. The person you lost would want you to go on, not because your love for them should end, but because they can see from where they are what you cannot see from here, that there is still so much ahead of you, that the love you carry for them can be carried lightly enough that you can still walk forward with it. If this understanding of life as a cycle that does not end at death, of consciousness as something that continues, of love as something that neither the living nor the dead ever fully lose, speaks to something you have been looking for, the ebook Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence was written to go deeper into exactly this territory. Not with simple answers, with the depth and the honesty that these questions deserve. The link is in the description, and the question that this entire history, this entire human story of reaching across the boundary between the living and the dead, finally arrives at. What if the conversation was never really interrupted? What if what felt like a goodbye was also a beginning of a different kind of connection? One that does not require physical presence to be real? And what if the most loving thing you can do right now, for the person who left, and for yourself, is to trust that they are whole, that they are held, and to turn your full and tender attention back to the life that is still, beautifully and briefly, yours. That is not letting go of them. That is the truest way to keep them with you. And it is the gift that, if they could tell you anything from where they are, they would most want you to receive.